If you have topics you would like to have us discuss on the Aging Well podcast, please click on the links in the episode description to send us a text or record your message or comments. We'd love to hear from you and how we can help you age well. If you benefit from the Aging Well podcast and would like to support the content financially, please click on the Support the Show link or support our affiliates and advertisers. Welcome to the Aging Well podcast. I'm Jeff Armstrong here with Corbin Bruton. In this and the episodes that follow, we will share candid discussions on aging and hear from the experts. We are here to inform and encourage as we experience, aging. In this episode, Dr. Armstrong joins fitness trainer Sandi Griffin and the participants of her annual 12-week transformation challenge to talk about the art and science of exercise. Join us as we discuss the basic science of exercise and the art of the training continuum. It's my pleasure to be back here for a second year. I love doing this. I hope this continues. It's be nice if I could fly to Colorado and do this live, which would be nice, but maybe one of these days we can plan for that. But in the meantime, we'll do the old Zoom meeting. So this year's topic, I opted to talk about the art and science of exercise. And I teach exercise science. My background is exercise physiology. That's what I have my PhD in. So I tend to be very sciencey when it comes to exercise science, but I also believe very strongly that there's much more of an art to it as well. And so I'm just going to start with a little bit of the science background and then get to what I think is more of the art. And there's a few very basic principles. There we go. Few very basic principles that I cover regularly in my classes. In fact, my students probably get overburdened with hearing these same principles over and over again, but you can't hear them enough. And these are overload, progression, specificity, reversibility, and recovery. And you've probably heard these from Sandi, I'm sure, countless times as well. And you've probably heard them in other places, but overload is basically that principle that in order for a body system to adapt, it has to be stressed to a level greater than that to which it is accustomed. And a lot of people have a tendency to think I'm exercising and they go out and do the same thing day after day after day after day and then wonder why they're not getting any progress. It's because our body needs to be stressed to say, hey, I'm doing something more than I'm used to. I have to make some adjustments in case this idiot begins to do it more often and does more of it. And so our body adapts when it's stressed. And along with that is the principle of progression. And sometimes we just refer to it as progressive overload, that it requires that we do a little bit more in order to continue adapting. So as long as we are doing a little bit more, our body is going to adjust to that and grow to or adapt to a higher state. Specificity is the principle that our body makes specific adaptations to impose demands. So if I want to build strength, I have to do things that are going to stress my muscles and stimulate a gain in strength. If I go out and I'm running 5 miles a day, I'm not building strength, I'm building more cardiorespiratory endurance. And then we have the unfortunate principle of reversibility. And if I could find a way that you could train to a certain level and then take a pill and then maintain that for the rest of your life, I would do it and I would be extremely rich. I'd be richer if I could come up with a way that you didn't have to train at all to get to that. But we know we have to train. But unfortunately, if we stop training, we are going to revert back to a lower training status. And that's why, we have to kind of continue to at least maintain if we want to keep the gains that we've really worked hard to make. And then recovery is the fun part. We have to have time to recover from the exercise. We need time to adapt. We need for the body to be able to rest and recover and to grow and to make the adaptations that we're trying to make. So those are the basic principles of adaptation. There's a few critical concepts that I teach in my classes. I tell my students that these are the most important concepts in exercise science. And the first is the bioenergy systems that consists of 3 energy systems. We have what's called the ATP-PC system, which is basically just the storage of adenosine triphosphate and phosphocreatine in the muscle that allows us to do kind of that immediate, high intensity, short-term bursts of exercise. Glycolytic is where we're building up the lactic acid in a system. It's more intermediate. And then oxidative is the more long-term, more what we would call aerobic type of metabolism. And then I teach them the Fick equation. And we're going to go into this in a little bit more detail. And I hope I don't scare you that I'm getting too sciencey. I'm going to keep it to a minimum, but kind of lay the groundwork for where we can get into the art a little bit more. But VO2 is just the oxygen consumption. That's how much oxygen your body's using in order to do work. And that is a product of your heart rate, stroke volume, which is how much blood your heart is pumping with each beat. And then AVO2 difference stands for arteriovenous oxygen difference. And that's just the difference in how much oxygen is in the capillary going into the tissue and how much is coming out. So the more we can extract, the more work we can do. And then I always teach my students, and I teach a pathophysiology and exercise class, and I tell students the basic thing that come out of this class with is that if you want to be healthy and you want to increase your longevity and avoid disease, things that you need to do are not smoke or stop smoking if you smoke, exercise, maintain a healthy body composition, and eat a healthy diet. And essentially, if we do those 4 things, we are going to have pretty decent long life. Of course, there's things that happen that are out of our control, but if we're going to control our health and our longevity, those are the things that we need to do. So I also teach my students that we can basically compartmentalize exercise and the types of physical fitness into 2 categories. We have the health-related components of physical fitness and the neuromotor skill-related components of physical fitness. And health-related components of physical fitness are your cardiorespiratory or your aerobic fitness. We have muscle endurance, muscle strength, body composition, and flexibility. These are all things that we can do to improve our health, activate our health. Neuromotor skill related, oftentimes we think of those are just for the athletes, but they're really for everybody. They're for, anybody from young age to, the end of life. When we're old and, we're crossing the street, we don't want to be that Tim Conway individual. And I don't know, I was able to use that analogy speaking to a senior group the other day, and everybody knew who I was talking about. When I tell my students that, they look at me like, who the heck is Tim Conway?
I think I might be one of the only people in our group that knows who Tim Conway is too.
You got to Google him. Look him up on YouTube. He is one of the funniest men ever, or was one of the funniest men ever. But he used to do a bit where he was an old man. He'd walk really, really slow and slow shuffling. And, we want to be able to still move our bodies pretty quickly as we age. It's not running sprints or any of that. It's just being able to make those quick movements in multiple directions that allow us to prevent falls, to be able to function at a higher level as we get older and all that. So speed, power, agility, balance, coordination, and reaction time are also very important components of physical fitness. I'm skipping ahead too fast here. I stress the bioenergy systems because to me, they define exercise. They tell us whether we're working for strength or whether we're working for endurance. They tell us whether we're doing aerobic work or anaerobic work. And they can even define whether we are doing physical activity or exercise. And by the latter, by exercise, I mean that not all activity is exercise. We tend to think, oh, I'm physically active. Well, physical activity is good and it's very important, and we need more of that. Some of that could be some of our active recovery from exercise. But exercise is essentially that type of physical activity that we are doing for specific purposes. And those specific purposes are to improve our health, improve our body composition or our appearance, and to improve our performance. And so there's a slight distinction between exercise and physical activity. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And the nature of the activity that we do is important as well to, again, going back to specificity, how we're going to adapt to the exercise. So now, again, it looks a little bit too sciencey for you, but just bear with me. We mentioned that VO2 is the rate of oxygen consumption. In short, the more intense the activity, the more oxygen we're going to be consuming. Until, of course, it becomes anaerobic, and then we can still increase the intensity, but we're not using oxygen to fuel that activity. We're using the energy stores that are present already in the muscle. When we look at the adaptations that come with VO2 or aerobic fitness, there's a couple things to consider. First, that our initial cardiovascular fitness is dependent mostly upon our stroke volume. So the individual variability that we see amongst people is due to how much blood your heart is naturally able to pump with each beat. And that's dependent on a lot of things: genetics, size of the body. Men tend to have a higher VO2 than women because we tend to have bigger hearts. We tend, larger bodies mean larger, hearts that have to pump the blood. Just by nature, some people have higher stroke volumes than others. And then if we look at what training does, with endurance training, we see about a 50-50 improvement in both stroke volume and AVO2 difference in terms of what's contributing to VO2 improvements. And so when we look at the nature of the exercise, we want to look at what components of that VO2 are being affected by the exercise that are going to stimulate the adaptation. AVO2 difference depends largely on the number of mitochondria in the muscle, as well as the amount of capillaries. And so if we increase the number of mitochondria and we increase the amount of blood flow into the muscle, we can increase our ability to extract oxygen. So there's kind of two pieces to this, and I don't have it labeled quite on this slide, but we have the product of heart rate and stroke volume is the ability of the system to deliver oxygen to the muscle. AVO2 difference is our ability to actually extract that oxygen and to use that. And we can train accordingly to make sure that we adapt both of those and optimize our performance improvements. All right, so now you have an exercise science degree. You've learned everything you need to know to be an exercise scientist. But again, as I said, exercise is as much an art as it is a science. And why do I say that? It's because exercisers are individuals. We are all different. Everyone responds differently to exercise. Everyone has different genetics. There's a quote that I use in my physiology of exercise class that comes from a gentleman by the name of Per Olaf Astrand. He is a very famous exercise physiologist, goes back in the early 1900s or so. And he's famous for saying, if you want to be an elite athlete, choose your parents wisely. And so, we could take that two ways. We can blame our parents for our inadequacies, or we can thank them for, the physical skills that they've given us, or the body type that they've given us that allow us to be athletes and so on. But, essentially it just means that if you want to be an endurance athlete, you got to have been born with the right genetics to be an endurance athlete. You can't kind of force yourself into a different mold than what you were kind of born to fit. And, that's okay. It just means that we are going to adapt differently to exercise. Some people are going to adapt more effectively to some forms of exercise than others. Some people can go to the gym, pick up a dumbbell, and immediately their biceps just grow. It's a little extreme, but it seems like there's people like that. They just look at a weight and their muscles are all growing. And then there's people like me that can lift and lift and lift and never see any real adaptations other than just maybe getting stronger. We all have different needs. And that could go back to our genetics. It can go to our lifestyle. It can go to a lot of different things. We all have different goals. We have different lifestyles. It's easy to say we all have the same 24 hours, but we don't. But how we use those 24 hours, we have some level of responsibility within that and ability to do with those hours what we want. Now, there's things that are out of our control. We can't, determine how much we have to work, or, all the different sports that our kids want us to take them to, or how much we have to commute to work, or, we have to sleep. We got to make sure we get enough sleep in there. You're going to have to eat. You're going to have to do certain other activities, but there's a lot of activities that we do in our lifetime that we don't need to be doing or are contrary to our goals. And when we're spending time doing those, we're not accomplishing the things that we can. And so, even though we have different lifestyles and everything else, we can still manage within our own parameters to get the most optimal exercise. And so, like I said, one of the most often neglected principles of adaptation is individuality. So basically, what works for me isn't necessarily going to work for you, and vice versa. So we don't want to look at that person next to us in the gym and say, gee, they're getting really great results and they're not working half as hard as I am. Maybe I need to do something different, or maybe I need to train like they do. And that's where, you can really get sucked into some of the pseudo exercise that you can find on YouTube and stuff, because you get these people that just naturally have great physiques, and they're doing something really outlandish, and you think, well, it must work because look at them. And when in reality, they could do anything and look like they do. I tend to look at the people who have kind of come from the most difficult genetics and circumstances and have gotten fit and accomplished many things, and kind of look at, okay, well, what are they doing? Because obviously it's got to work, because look at how they've transformed themselves, and look what they've done with kind of the poorer genetics that they might have been given. And so we have to consider that everybody is different and we can't be the same as everybody else. And I also consider what I refer to as the opportunity costs. And I stole this from another sports physiologist. He used it, I think, more off the cuff, but I've kind of adopted it to the point where my students think I say it way too much. But by opportunity costs, I mean that, again, going back to that 24-hour day that we all have, everything that we do in a 24-hour period or a 7-day week or a month, a year, whatever it might be, we have to sacrifice something to be able to do that. Because we can't just cram more and more into a 24-hour period, because there's not space for it. So everything, we put something else in there. So if I decide that I'm going to spend 2 hours tonight on Facebook instead of exercising, well, I've lost that opportunity to exercise, and I've lost the gains that I might get from that. Doesn't mean I shouldn't do a little bit of time on Facebook, maybe to connect with friends and so on. But if it's taking away from my goals, then it is detrimental and it's not going to benefit me. So regarding exercise, the choices we make are critical to our success. And the times that we spend doing something contrary to our goals is going to limit those opportunities to succeed. And for these reasons, I consider what's called the FIT principle, and you've probably heard this before. I feel like this falls into the art of exercise. Well, it's certainly scientifically based. It absolutely must take into consideration the principle of individuality and the principle of opportunity cost. So if you're not familiar with FIT, which I think probably most people are familiar with it, but just in case, it stands for frequency, intensity, type, or time and type. Frequency is how often. So how often are we doing whatever it is we're doing? Is it 3 days a week, 4 days a week, 5 days a week? Intensity is how much. And that could be, how much weight you are lifting, or how many minutes of cardiovascular exercise that you're doing at a certain intensity, and so on. Time is how long. Type is what. And while I can say, do this 3 to 5 times a week at this intensity for this long and this many repetitions, exercise guidelines are just that, guidelines. I tell my students, we learn the ACSM guidelines, American College of Sports Medicine guidelines. And I tell them, I'm going to teach you these, but these are basic guidelines, and we're going to basically throw them out the window, because they're only going to work for a certain number of people in certain situations. And we may need, or we're absolutely going to need to adapt those for specific goals. I mean, I wouldn't train an athlete using those particular guidelines. I wouldn't necessarily train an obese individual who's trying to lose a significant amount of weight using those same principles. So they are just guidelines. And I will tell you also that when it comes to many of those guidelines, we are much more capable of doing more than what those guidelines indicate. In fact, the the standard guidelines for cardiorespiratory exercise and physical activity are about 150 minutes of moderate exercise on a weekly basis. And that can be spread out in smaller chunks or, less frequent chunks of exercise. But statistically, and this is a statistic that I learned through COVID, about, or rather fewer than 23% of the US population actually meets those minimum physical activity guidelines, which is really, really depressing when you figure that probably among that 23%, there's going to be maybe a good 5 or 10% of those people that are doing too much exercise. And then there's those that are doing some, but they're still not really doing enough to accomplish a tremendous amount of adaptation. And then there's probably a small amount in there that are really doing the optimal amount of exercise that they can and should be doing to reach their goals. So I've created for my students what I've called the training continuum. And I hope we can see this. I don't know why it's not clicking to it. There we go. And I'll see that. I know you might be on different devices. If you're looking on your phone, you're absolutely not going to be able to see this. And what I can do is I can share this with Sandi that she can get it out to everybody if they're interested. But I've done this to kind of break down and give a little bit of a visual as to the framework that we can use for exercise and really how it is a bit of an art in terms of what we do. There's no absolutes, with the exception of, one particular goal. There's probably a bit more of an absolute what you should be doing to accomplish that. But it's much more of a spectrum of things that we can be doing. And so remember the health related components, there's cardiorespiratory endurance, muscle endurance, strength, body composition, and flexibility. And if you notice there, flexibility, I have a question mark next to it because flexibility is kind of that odd parameter of exercise that we can spend some time specific to flexibility, trying to improve our range of motion, but it's not absolutely necessary in many cases. If you have good flexibility, you don't need to be spending a lot of time stretching. In fact, I would discourage somebody who is very flexible from stretching too much because, again, opportunity cost. You are taking away from what you could be doing in an area that you need more adaptation, where you need more change. I had a student a number of years ago that was in my kinesiology class, and she would sit in the back of the room and she'd pull her leg up behind her head and just sit there with it. She was a dancer. And I was like, would you please stop that? You're like, freak me out. You're making me hurt, because she was so flexible. And for somebody like that to be stretching, it's just kind of a real waste of time. And if you are functional and you can move through the necessary range of motion pain-free, you don't necessarily have to spend as much time doing flexibility. And if we're exercising correctly, we are moving through a full range of motion, we are benefiting in our range of motion. So I leave that as kind of a question mark, because anything that you are doing can contribute to that and should contribute to, improvement in flexibility as well as the maintenance of flexibility. When we look at body composition is the relative amount of fat and muscle you have in your body. There are three approaches to improving your body composition. You can simply just lose fat, which is going to lower your percent body fat, but you're not gaining any muscle. And, talk a little bit about how that isn't necessarily an ideal goal. We can lose body fat and gain muscle more or less in the same time frame, which is pretty good because you might not change your body weight, but your body composition is changing because you're increasing muscle as you lose fat. And probably the more ideal way of improving our body composition is to increase our muscle mass more significantly than we are decreasing our fat. Because two reasons for that. First off, if I'm increasing my muscle mass and I'm decreasing fat, I'm getting healthier. I'm able to do more activity, which means as I'm aging, if I want to offset the effects of aging, we're all aging. I don't know why I said if I'm aging. I am getting old. We're all getting old. But if we want to offset that loss in muscle mass, we want to increase it by lifting weights and building muscle. And if I build muscle, I can do more things. And one reason I kind of discourage people from only losing body fat and not focusing on increasing muscle mass is what we end up seeing is a bit of a downward spiral in terms of our health when we focus on that. Because as we just lose body fat, we also tend to lose a little bit of muscle mass, especially if we're exercising only doing low intensity cardiovascular exercise. And I noticed this a number of years ago. I went to a conference and they were honoring a bunch of the senior fellows in the American College of Sports Medicine. And when I started in exercise science, it was much more of a push on cardiovascular exercise. You didn't see as many the strength conditioning people in exercise physiology. And, I never paid a huge amount of attention to it. But as I saw these older gentlemen kind of all kyphotic, they're leaning over, they look very frail, moving very slowly, I realized these are the guys that were all telling us we got to do cardio, and worry about, heart health. And what happens when we do that is we lose body fat, but then we always tend to put body fat back on. So we lose it again. And in the process, each time we're losing a little bit of muscle mass. And even if we maintain our muscle mass, we are not improving our capacity to do more work. And so eventually our cardio begins to really plateau. We can't do as much, and we probably still start to lose some muscle mass. Whereas if we can gain muscle mass, we can do more, we can be more active. And as we're being more active, we can maintain that cardiovascular health. We can improve our fat composition, and we have much better longevity because we're more active. We're more able to do the daily activities of daily living and so on. And so I really encourage at least to be in the middle of this continuum where we're building some muscle and we're reducing the body fat to a healthy level, not excessively. We don't have to, and Sandi will tell you as a bodybuilder, bodybuilders do not spend 365 days at their leanest body composition. It's unhealthy and it's not sustainable, and it's probably not enjoyable either. I would say that last cut is probably the worst period in your year, right? But when we can increase muscle mass, to maintain that muscle mass, we get to eat a little bit more, right? Because you have to maintain that muscle with some calories. And so we can eat more, but still kind of lose the body fat, and we enjoy life a little bit better. So that's kind of body composition. And as we kind of move down in this and we look at the other three components of health-related physical fitness, I have cardiorespiratory to the left of the figure, muscle endurance in the middle, and there's a little bit of overlap between muscle strength and muscle endurance, and we'll kind of get to that. But if we start at the lower end, you'll see LSD and LISS, that's long, slow distance and low intensity, steady state. To me, this is much more physical activity. We should be moving more. And the more we're moving, we're generally going to be doing that at a lower intensity, but as brisk as we generally can. I mean, if we're walking to get from point A to point B and not really exercising, it's helpful still to try and get there as quick as possible because we can get a little bit of health benefit from it and we have time for other things, right? So long, slow distance and low intensity, steady state may improve your VO2 max, but it's going to have a very slight effect. And all of that effect is going to come primarily from a slight improvement in your stroke volume. And that comes from just, certain physiological changes that may come from increasing your plasma volume and some things like that. I'm starting to sound sciencey, and we're supposed to be in the art part. But
actually just wanted to comment on the long, slow distance. I get a lot of clients that go on vacation, and we talk about trying to find hotels with gyms in there. Or what are you going to do to keep up your fitness while you're on vacation or while you're traveling or whatever? And I get often a lot of times people make the comment, well, we walked about 5 or 6 miles all over the city, so that was my cardio.
I discussed my epigenetics test with True Diagnostic co-founder Hannah Wendt in episode 162. Epigenetic testing measures baseline and changes in your pace of aging, giving you the power to steer your anti-aging or health and wellness journey in the right direction. I learned that I am aging well. Click on the affiliate link in the episode description, use the promo code AGEWELL, and receive a 12% discount on your epigenetics test and monitor your pace of aging. Yeah. It's not your cardio, it's your physical activity, but it's beneficial for, you're going to burn body fat, you're burning calories. So, enjoy those calories you're eating on vacation, but be a little bit more active to offset them. But it's not going to improve your VO2 max. It's not going to improve your cardiorespiratory endurance. And that's why, if you kind of go down, there's not even any other adaptations other than maybe a slight improvement in your stroke volume max. And as we move up in intensity, we get to more moderate intensity, maybe moderate intensity interval training. We can begin to see a little bit better adaptations. So when we get into that a bit more brisk, higher intensity, more intentional aerobic exercise, that we start to affect the AVO2 difference, which is going to give us, a better overall improvement in your VO2 max. And that's going to come from, increasing the number of mitochondria, increasing the number of blood capillaries to the muscle, but also increasing the muscle's ability to utilize that oxygen and to store oxygen so that it can do more activity. And so I have a few different exercises listed under that. High intensity interval training, we're all familiar with that. It's a bit more of a regimented, high intense bouts, followed by some recovery bouts, followed by another intense bout. And those intensity bouts are pretty much prescribed in the exercise. And so they're regulated. It might be like 30 seconds of high intensity and then 2 minutes of recovery. Whereas tempo and Farlek, and it depends on kind of who's defining it. I think of tempo as just kind of picking up the intensity in a more random fashion. Other groups will kind of define tempo as being, just a bit more brisker, continuous type of exercise, a little bit closer to like if you were a cross-country racer to your race time. Whereas Farlek is more irregular increases and decreases in the intensity. So that might be going out for a run and you say, okay, I'm going to run as hard as I can to this next telephone pole, and then I'm going to jog for a while. So it's a bit more variable. And then we have the infamous Tabata. And you'll notice I have Tabata on my figure twice, and one time in quotation marks, and the other has IE1 after it. I'm a very stickler for the term Tabata because Tabata is based off of a research study that was done in Japan. I believe it was 1998 by Azumi Tabata and colleagues. And what they did was they took a bunch of Olympic level speed skaters, recruited them for a study where they were going to bike 5 times a week. 4 times of the week were going to be this very high intensity, this IE1 protocol. And then they did one just more steady state. And then they compared it to comparable athletes doing 5 days of just steady state cardiovascular exercise. And they had, the protocol was basically set up that you do a little bit of a warm up, and then you do 8 cycles of 20 seconds of what more than an all-out effort. It's actually 170%, I believe it is, 175% of your VO2 max for 20 seconds, and then you recover for 10 seconds, and then repeat that 8 times. So you do a total of 4 minutes of rather intensive exercise, then you kind of cool down. And they found that there was a pretty significant improvement in VO2 max just doing that, really about 4 minutes of exercise, warm up and cool down. It probably extended to about 10 to 12 minutes of exercise. But the key there is that that exercise was so intense that some of those Olympic athletes couldn't complete it. And so they had to be dropped from the study. And so pretty much all of us are not going to be able to do a true Tabata workout to where we're at that intensity. And it's probably not even recommended for most of us. So to get that same benefit, you got to go pretty hard. And it can only be done on a bike, maybe on a rowing machine where you can really quickly vary that intensity. I wouldn't necessarily recommend, particularly the IE1 protocol on a rower, because you're more than likely going to hurt your back doing it because you just cannot sustain that effort very well in proper form. And so when I put Tabata in quotation marks, it's that modification of the Tabata program where you're doing more maybe body weight type exercises or burpees and those types of things for a very intense burst, usually 20 seconds with a 10-second rest, and doing those multiple times in a workout. Those are excellent. They are going to have a little less effect on improving your cardiorespiratory endurance as the true Tabata would, but you're going to get some cardiovascular benefits, but they're going to be very tremendous for improving muscle endurance and really good for body composition. And the reason they're good for body composition is because that high intensity exercise increases your metabolism for a sustained period of time. Where, if you do long, slow distance or, moderate intensity, steady state exercise, and you go 30 minutes and you burn, say, 400 calories in that 30-minute period of time, really within a few minutes after that exercise, you're back to your normal caloric expenditure, your normal resting energy expenditure. Whereas with something like that quotation mark Tabata, or what I'd also call high intensity interval resistance training or burst training, you extend that metabolism for, research has shown, as much as several days. And so if you think about it, even if you're only burning an extra 10 calories an hour for 24 hours, that's an extra 240 calories that you're burning just recovering from the exercise. And it's a really great way to burn extra calories and, keep your metabolism up. And you're also not necessarily building muscle, because, muscle endurance isn't really muscle size. It's just the ability of that muscle, again, at the cellular level, that AVO2 difference increases dramatically. And then as we move across the spectrum, we start getting a little bit closer to size. And you'll see I have there as well 2 types of hypertrophy: sarcoplasmic hypertrophy and myofibrillar hypertrophy. Sarcoplasmic hypertrophy is really what the bodybuilder wants, just for appearance sake. Now, it's not ideal just to build sarcoplasmic hypertrophy because it doesn't necessarily come with strength, but it comes with the increase in the size of the muscle. And basically what's happening there is we're increasing the volume of the muscle, but not necessarily the size of the protein components of the muscle. Whereas myofibrillar hypertrophy is the type of hypertrophy that isn't maybe as voluminous as sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, but it comes with it more strength gains. And so we generally want a little bit of both if we're looking for appearance. If you're a real power athlete and in a sport that demands that you keep your body weight low, like Olympic lifting, powerlifting, wrestling, sports like that, you may want to focus more on just building strength without all that extra size. But if you're interested in improving your physique, a bit of both is going to be necessary, because the strength that we get from myofibrillar hypertrophy gives us the capacity to do more when we're training for that sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. And the volume of work that we do in muscle endurance training and sarcoplasmic hypertrophy training gives us the kind of the endurance capacity to lift and recover those heavier weights. And so they kind of work together. And it's always good to be varying the type of exercise that you're doing across this continuum so that you are adapting, again, specificity, you're getting adaptations in all those different parameters of strength, muscle endurance, and cardiovascular, and so on. And so there's a bit more of a continuum in that exercise. And I break it down a little bit further. We don't have to necessarily go into absolute strength, speed, strength, explosive speed, and all that. That's a bit more for my strength and conditioning students. But it all just has to do with how we train the muscle, how we're moving the muscle. Are we moving slow? Are we doing it fast? Are we using lighter weights but very explosively, and so on? And so the training that we do, there's no absolute. I mean, if I told you, okay, you should do 8 to 12 repetitions of 3 to 5 sets of 8 exercises for, your strength training, it's not bad. It's going to give you, as you notice, that's where the overlap is between strength and muscle endurance. If that's kind of where your favorite kind of zone is, you're going to get pretty good gains overall from that. But there's more that we can do as we spread out in the capacity. And so at this point, I'm kind of thinking, ask for questions. We could discuss some of that pseudo exercise science that we can get on the internet. Anybody have any questions?
Well, it looks like everybody is super excited to do Tabata on Monday or on Thursday when I get back. So thank
True
you for
Tabata
that.
or quotation mark Tabata?
Probably quotation marks.
Okay.
So I had a question in a breath in regards to the increase of oxygen in the muscle. So I'm thinking specifically of a muscle or a limb not being used for a significant period of time and how you bring oxygen to that muscle.
Pretty much by using it. I mean, if it hasn't been used a lot, then it hasn't had a tremendous amount of circulation. I mean, obviously the blood flows through every tissue in the body, but the more we use the tissue, the more we see the vessels open up and blood flowing into that. And it also triggers a lot of the different hormonal responses and the cellular responses, all the stuff that's way too much of the science side, not the art side. Just kind of consider it Arnold's pump you up kind of thing, right? That, getting the blood flow into the muscle is going to stimulate its utilization of oxygen. So when it's deprived of oxygen doing the exercise, and it's easy to deprive an untrained muscle of oxygen because it's not used to getting it and it doesn't have the capacity to really use oxygen. And so you exhaust that muscle pretty quickly. It's going to say, whoa, Gina's starting to exercise here. I got to make some adaptations to be able to keep up with her. And so the next time, it's going to be a little bit more prepared and you do a little bit more and the muscle says, oh, yeah, still at it. She's doing more. I got to adapt a little bit more. And we just keep adapting. And the body always adapts to be just a little bit ahead of us in terms of what it's kind of anticipating. I know I'm kind of giving a, persona to the physiology of the body, like it thinks these things, but in a sense, it kind of does. I mean, we have all the, the genetics and the cellular responses and stuff. That's all that microbiology and stuff that's way over even my head. That that basically triggers the muscle, tells it, what to do and how to adapt to whatever stimulus it's getting. And so, the more we are demanding oxygen at the muscle level, the more the muscle is going to respond to that by increasing the number of mitochondria. Initially it's just going to kind of waken up some of those blood vessels that maybe haven't really been as functional for a while. And, so they start, dilating a little bit more and giving some more blood flow into the skeletal muscle. And the more we're demanding oxygen in the muscle, the more the blood vessels are going to say, we need to increase our numbers in order to get more oxygen to this tissue. And so if it's a muscle that hasn't been used a lot, it's hungry to be exercised and it's going to adapt very quickly from both a neurological and a physiological standpoint. Muscle or tissue is going to adapt very quickly initially. And that's why we always see very rapid responses when we start exercising. And then we tend to kind of plateau a little bit because the body becomes a lot more accustomed to the type of exercise that we're doing, the amount that we're doing. And if we're doing it long enough, it's getting to that kind of genetic ceiling where it's like, this is the most I need to adapt. And, as Sandi will tell you, with trying to hypertrophy the muscle for bodybuilding, it becomes very difficult once you get to a certain level because it's not natural for our bodies to carry that much muscle mass because it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of food, it takes a lot of effort, and the body wants to just kind of prevent us from having to, energize all that muscle and use that muscle as much. And so you have to really trick it a little bit more to kind of get it to grow even further, which is always, kind of a good answer. There's people that say, I don't want to lift heavy weights because I don't want to get big, bulky muscles. Well, the reality is, and Sandy's heard me say this before, I think that the reality is you're not willing to work hard enough to get those if you don't want them. Or if you're willing, you don't have to. But from the initial aspects of the exercise, it's just, once you start it, you're going to start seeing some adaptations. And so we also have to remember too that this continuum is relative. So what is, 80 to 90% of my one repetition maximum is going to be a lot more weight than it might be for some of you. I'm not going to say all of you, because who knows who's in this group, and there may be some of you that can definitely lift more than me. But if it's 80% of what you can do, it's going to trigger that type of response in your body. And so, we start out light, but we keep adding to it. We adapt the body. And not only are we going to adapt the cardiorespiratory and the muscle endurance, but we're building the strength as well. So the higher the intensity that we do of any exercise, the more we're capturing everything that's below that in that continuum. And so I tend to favor being as much to the right of this continuum as possible. Did that answer your question? Maybe more so?
That was great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then Maria threw a question in the chat. What's the difference between HIIT and Tabata? And there seems to be a lot more HIIT workouts available online.
Yeah, so HIIT is probably a little bit more reasonable than Tabata. It doesn't have to be that 170 plus % of your maximum. It's just a higher intensity. So it can be really any intensity that is high enough to get your heart rate up and stimulate that cardiorespiratory response. And it's followed by, a period of recovery. So technically Tabata is high intensity interval training, but it's a protocol that is going to be much more difficult for individuals. So most of what we kind of do is going to be high intensity interval training, especially if we're going to be doing it for, say, 30 minutes of exercise and you're doing those increases and decreases. To be able to sustain it that long, it's probably more of a HIIT workout. If I get on the bike and I'll do the quotation mark Tabata, and I might do in a 30-minute bout, do some warm up, and then I do a burst of really hard, high intensity for 20 seconds, followed by, 10-second recovery. So kind of paralleling that to true Tabata, i.e. one protocol, but as hard as I can go. And then I recover for a little bit, and then I could do another bout of that. If I did a true Tabata, I wouldn't be able to do that for, 2 bouts. I'd be completely exhausted. So HIIT is pretty much it's the same. It's just it's whatever high intensity you choose and the duration of those that you choose. And that's the fun part of kind of putting together cardiorespiratory exercise programs. You can do a different HIIT workout every day. You can vary up the different durations. You can do it on different modes of exercise and so on. So the difference comes in, you get in like the high intensity interval resistance training and then high intensity resistance training. High intensity interval resistance training is what I think most people kind of think of with Tabata, where you're doing some kind of weighted exercise, loading the muscle for generally as many repetitions as possible within a framework of time. And then you have a very short recovery period, sometimes no recovery period. We've done circuit training before in the past. I grew up on Nautilus training. That's what I was weaned on. That's how old I am. But, it's just one exercise after the other in a short circuit would be considered, well, in that case would be high intensity resistance training. But interval is a little bit more to the cardiovascular side, or higher reps and just as many repetitions as possible in a little bit longer time frame than you might be doing in a HIIT workout, one-eye HIIT workout. So does that answer that?
I don't think she
gave me a thumbs up.
But yeah.
What else? Are there more questions in the chat? Because I see a number 7 up there.
Yeah, there was a follow-up question by Maria. This said, also the body needs to rest. Does this mean taking a day after a big workout, or 1 day a week, or just sleeping well?
Yes. Recovery is a bit of that. That's when the art comes in. It's the idea of recovery is to be able to come back and do what the next intended workout is at the level that you need to do it. We refer to that as maximum recoverable volume, is how much you can do maximally and still come back and complete the next workout. And so, if you did a hard, true Tabata workout, or even a hard intensity quotation mark Tabata workout, you're not going to want to do that every day. You're going to probably need a little bit more recovery from that, but that doesn't mean take the entire day off. You can maybe do some, low intensity, steady state exercise, or more moderate intensity interval training, or even another interval, but it's not quite as intense, so that we're still burning calories, we're still stressing the cardiovascular system, but we're giving the body enough time to really fully recover. And so recovery can be from day to day. It can be, having one or two recovery days within the week. And it is absolutely sleeping well, and it's the quality of sleep. It's getting regular sleep. I'm a firm believer in a bedtime for adults, and ideally a little bit earlier than most of us would probably want, so that we can get up earlier. 6 to 8 hours of sleep. And we tend to say, 7 to 8, or we also tend to think that maybe more sleep is better, but it's not necessarily better, especially if we're not getting good quality sleep. Many of you might be familiar with Arnold's quote about, if you're sleeping more than 6 hours, sleep faster. And, I talk about that with my students because here's somebody who obviously needed to adapt to grow the muscles that he grew and trained pretty intensely. And yet he said, 6 hours of sleep was sufficient. Well, we also have to kind of put a little asterisk next to that he was also doing performance enhancement drugs at times in his training that made recovery a little bit more effective. But still, if we're eating well, we're getting a good at least 6 to 8 hours of quality sleep per night. And, by quality sleep, it means we're not laying there staring at the ceiling, tossing and turning and all that. 4 hours of quality sleep is going to be better than 8 hours of tossing and turning and being half asleep throughout your bedtime. So it's getting good sleep, and comfortable sleep. If our bodies are aching, can we find a way to sleep that's going to make us comfortable so that we get a good night's sleep? I think sleep is hugely important with recovery, and then nutrition is huge. So eating right, sleeping right, and then managing our workloads so that we can adequately recover from those. One big gripe that I have with the American College of Sports Medicine guidelines in terms of exercise and resistance training, saying that we need to take 24 to 72 hours between muscle groups. Well, that's not necessarily true. It depends how you're training those muscles, and there's actually no science to back it up. That's why it really bothers me, because I've gone to conferences where they've detailed that, and they've shown the research that shows that you can there's a study that shows you can bench press 5 days a week and actually get more gains than just doing it one time a week or 2 times a week. And yet they said, well, we still say 2 to 3 days recovery. Well, there's no basis for that. I think in many cases that we are tending to undertrain more than we overtrain. It's just, you're not going to go kill yourself in a workout and come back the next day and do the same thing. But if I can spread that workout over more of the week, then I'm going to get better responses from it. So it's just really a much more of a matter of how am I allowing my body to recover from the exercise that I do. And if you find that you do a specific workout and you're really tired the next morning, and you got the regular amount of sleep, you're eating your right nutrition, then that may be either too intense of a workout for you, or you need that recovery. But what can you do that is going to allow you to recover but still keep you active? And I think it was Charles Stanley that speaks of fatigue specificity, that our body systems fatigue specific to the imposed demands as well as adapt specific to them. So if I do a really hard weight training workout where I'm focused on strength, muscle strength, and I'm really fatigued from that, yes, I'm going to probably want to wait a couple days before I do another really intense strength workout. But that doesn't mean the next day I can't do a cardio workout because my cardiovascular system wasn't stressed to the same level. So this is where a lot of, managing your programming and your exercise is, how you feel, what have you done, how am I recovering from what I did, and how can I manage to do more without tearing my body down? Because it's always about doing more. The more you can do, the more you're going to adapt.
I like that. Making, the more you do, the more you're going to improve.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people I don't know if it's the myths that are out there that, like you said, the taking 24 hours or 48 hours between 72 hours between muscle groups, whatever. People are, I think, afraid to do too much.
Yeah.
And so that they don't do enough.
And I don't know if, listeners have heard of James Lawrence. I think it's James. I've had a hard time remembering his name. He refers to himself as the Iron Cowboy. He's a triathlete, pretty extreme triathlete. He's done a number of different challenges, and one that he did and he documented was doing 50 Ironman distances in 50 days in 50 states. And he did it to raise money. I forget what the charity was. I think it was diabetes or something like that. But he, I think started in Hawaii and then just went from state to state and had to kind of manage all the logistics of not only doing that distance, because that's a marathon, which is just over 26 miles, I think biking 105 miles and swimming 2 miles. And most of us probably don't do that much in a week, let alone in a day, and repeat that 7 days a week for 50 days. But he, initial probably about third of the states and the distances that he did, it was just a struggle kind of mentally and kind of physically dealing with injuries and things like that. And then in the middle, it was just kind of motivation. But by the last third of those Ironman distances, he was actually improving his performance. And, that's just unheard of to me. You think that the performance has to start dropping off. You got to be overtraining doing that much. And he wasn't overtraining. But again, he had a chiropractor, traveling with them, I think a massage therapist, people managing kind of his meals. He was, resting whenever he could. His body adapted to eating the calories that he needed to consume. At one point he said he ate a porterhouse steak and a baked potato before running a marathon. And most of us, if we eat that before going and just doing a 20-minute cardio workout, we'd be throwing up all over the treadmill. But, his body adapted to that huge amount of stress. And so it really comes down to managing our recovery to be able to, keep doing more. And I love the comment, I might be over resting.
I know, I love Maria. Her and her husband are amazing.
So
But
what else?
People don't give them their bodies enough credit that they're amazing and that they can do so much. But nutrition plays a huge part of that, making sure that you're fueling your body to perform in that manner, but also that you are resting appropriately.
Yeah. Now you can't go and overdo it, or ramp it up tomorrow and say, okay, well, I listened to Armstrong's talk last night. I'm not doing enough, so I'm going to go out and do 10 miles of running today and bike 5 miles, and I'm going to lift weights. You got to build up to it. But we can do a little bit more, and as we do it progressively, we're going to improve.
So you guys have any other questions? This is one of your most amazing resources of information on exercise that you'll have. So please ask questions if you have them.
You guys let me off easy?
No, I'm going to ask again.
Oh, good.
Yeah, Gina.
So I have a current situation where my mom is bedridden and for the most part, very minimal mobility as far as one side of her body she can't put any weight on. So it's mostly her arms that she can move. And then one leg. Right now she's having difficulty standing up just because of nausea and then low blood pressure. So we're thinking of trying to get the heart rate up while managing that nausea. So what would you say are some things as an outside force I could do to help her?
As an outside, you mean doing outside activity?
Nope. It has to be
Just
indoors only, and it's only in a bed. But
okay.
me, so as a massage therapist or something on the outside that I could do that would actually benefit the muscles and getting the oxygen to the different muscles.
Any movement that she can do is going to improve that oxygen capacity. So just trying bit by bit to improve the level of motion that she can do. And, she can move more, maybe put a little resistance against it. It might even be having her, raise her arm, lying in the bed, and you just kind of press against her arm and have her raise that arm. So understanding which muscles you're trying to contract, have her contract. I mean, the similar things that you would do in the gym. Doesn't have to be with weights, doesn't have to be really even with any added resistance other than, gravity against the weight of her limb. Moving is going to give some benefit. And just progressively, again, that's that progressive overload. You do a little bit, somebody who can't move, if her limb that she can't move, if she can lift that a quarter of an inch off the bed one day, that's effort. And then the next day it could be, it's just above a quarter of an inch. Was that
about a half or so?
Trying to think fractions. Yeah, let's just jump up to half an inch. That's a little bit easier. I was trying to do a little bit more incrementally, but just move it up a little bit and just keep trying to progress that range of motion. Trying, as she can move her body through a necessary range of motion as much as she can, then you can begin to add a little bit of resistance to it. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It just has to be a little bit more. And just keep moving. And eventually, when she can stand, just standing is going to be effort for her. And then, stand for a little bit longer, And then eventually maybe take a step, 2 steps. And it's just, I love the movie, What About Bob? Have you ever seen What About Bob? I used to use it in one of my classes to underscore the idea of baby steps, and that, progression in exercise or any behavioral change is always just going to be small baby steps. And, so it's just little baby steps, do small things. And eventually, you begin to see much bigger gains. I think small steps in everything is important, even like with diet. Much of this 12-week transformation for many of you is going to be trying to lose body composition and changing your diet. What one thing can you do today that's going to take a couple calories out of your diet? Because those, if you 5 calories a day added up over 365 days is not a lot, but it adds up. And then you add, 10 calories, 365 days. 365 times 10 is a pound of fat. So, it's just those small little steps. I don't know if that helps. Does she work with a physical therapist or anybody, or?
She is. It's very minimal right now. Mm-hmm. So I was just wondering what are some things that I could do that would help and maybe encourage some of that blood flow and so on.
Yeah, just, whatever movement you can. And, if you're just kind of wanting some level of cardiovascular exercise, you can do that with just the arms. If she can sit up, I don't want you necessarily have to go out and buy any exercise equipment or anything, but, there are pretty, moderately priced, just like arm ergometers where you basically are pedaling with your arms, and, you just sit down on her lap or whatever and pedal. You could even rig up, if you have a old stationary bike, you can set that up to get the arms moving. But even just, even sitting up or even laying down, just kind of moving the arms is elevating the metabolism above rest, and it's going to work the heart. And then you just, again, move it a little bit more, maybe have to add a little bit of resistance to it, but, just getting her moving as much as possible. Any movement above just lying in bed is going to be some level of, in her case, exercise. For us, if we just, move in bed, it's not exercise, it's barely physical activity. But for somebody in her condition, that's exercise, and just progressing that to the point where, doing a little bit more each time.
And it could be something simple, Gina, like playing tug of war with like a towel with you,
Yeah.
where she's that little bit of resistance where you can kind of help her control that to where it's not too challenging.
Nice.
For the pull, or using your hand for the push, so that she's getting some better range of motion as well.
Nice. Yeah. Okay.
Anyone else?
Christy, Andre, Victoria, you guys are all great question askers. I know Jeff is an amazing presenter, so there's that.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Well, in case they're thinking of a question to ask, would you mind just briefly talking about your blog and podcast that you do?
Oh, yeah, sure. So I do have a blog. I haven't been blogging as much because I've been busy. I'm writing a textbook for pathophysiology and exercise. So that has taken a huge amount of time. But the podcast, the blog is Carpe Momento. It's actually, the address is Carpe Friggin Diem.
I love that.
Yeah, my dad didn't. That's why I couldn't use it. Apparently, it's very offensive in Great Britain, and I don't encourage anybody to look up, I guess, what it means. So I decided not to go with that. But my goal was to, kind of take the carpe diem and really, really stress, the importance of seizing it. And then I just decided to go with carpe momento, which I like actually better because it sees the moment. It's what we do right now, not necessarily in the big chunks. Again, it's baby steps. But I cover mostly just topics along the lines of what I call well-centered fitness. So it deals with spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social well-being. And so presently, I've set myself a goal of once a week. So I've been posting on Sunday mornings, keeping that up, hopefully, and that continues. I had for a while, I was doing about one a day. And that was a challenge from a friend of mine, Andy Lozier, that just requested that I write a blog a day until the end of wrestling season. He's a college wrestling coach. And so figured out that had to be the NCAAs. And so I made it to March that year and then figured I'm going to keep going. And I turned it into, I think it went about 2-3 years of doing it. And that just gets overwhelming and hard to do. But we just in January launched a podcast with a former student of mine. It's called the Aging Well Podcast. It's available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and then directly from Buzzsprout. And pretty much, I think you can Google it and find it. But the topics, I mean, it's geared toward successful aging and obviously aging well, but it's really intended for everybody from really conception to the grave. That the whole goal is to bring information that will allow people to make the choices and changes in their lives that are going to allow them to be healthy and live well. And Sandy's been a guest on there. It's one of our most popular interviews. We've got a wide range in there. Most recently, I interviewed a friend of mine from high school who heads up kind of the science end of the Mitochondrial Disease Foundation, United Mitochondrial Disease Foundation. And we had a really nice talk about mitochondria and their role in exercise and health and longevity. Not too sciencey, actually came off pretty good. We've talked about, just different other topics that might come up along the wellness lines. Just did one that'll be posted in 2 weeks. Well, I guess a week from Sunday, that is on preventing falls and core training. It's more geared toward the elderly. It was done in a retirement community. We've talked about different types of exercise, diet, talked about how the foods that you eat can affect your longevity. So right now, I think we're up to 26 podcasts. I think our 26th is posted on Sunday, and we want to keep going from there. So if you want to listen to it, it's there to listen to. I'd love to hear feedback on it. And, if you have topics that you'd be interested in, just let me know.
Awesome. So last call for questions, guys. And thank you all for popping in on this. This is probably one of the most poignant, resources of exercise and information that we have for the 12-week challenge. Jeff and I actually have never met in person. We've only met on Zoom.
One of these days.
Yeah. And we were connected by my personal training instructor, Lisa Patmore, and who was also one of my best friends and actually became a client of mine. And she graciously connected me with Jeff, who has just been a huge mentor and a huge inspiration to me as a personal trainer, and continuing to learn and grow in what I do and all the information. I love that you're so science-based and not the myth. So, and I guess in closing, what would be one piece of motivation or inspiration that you would share with somebody that's kind of maybe beginning their journey? Because at this point in the 12-week challenge, we're at 5.5 weeks. We'll start our 6th week on Monday. I just actually posed a question about motivation, and there's a lot of people that are kind of, that motivation starts to, the honeymoon phase when you first start, everything's really exciting, everything's really new. And then your life sets in, they start coming up, life starts happening, obstacles start popping up, challenges start, you start facing challenges, motivation starts to kind of a little bit. So what would you say to those folks that are kind of in that middle realm and to really finish off this last 6 weeks real strong?
I'd say, feed off of your successes and, stand up to your challenges, and be willing to, look at yourself and go, okay, where am I struggling and what can I do to offset that, to overcome that? And just keep doing baby steps, follow Bob Wiley, I think was his name, right? Bob Wiley, baby steps throughout the competition, and, you'll get there. And it's just little things. It doesn't have to be big things. It doesn't have to be really dramatic changes. If you like wine, you can have wine, but not the whole bottle, just cut down a little bit, look at the things that you can cut when it comes to the bad things or the things that are working against you. And then look at the things that you can add to your life that's going to help you achieve those goals. I don't know if that's good advice or anything unique.
Love it. No, you're just reiterating everything we talk about. So that's awesome.
So yeah, baby steps. Always my advice.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again for your time. And I know you have a crazy busy schedule, and I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to help us out.
I appreciate being invited. Thanks. Thank you all for attending. Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast. And until next time, keep aging well.